to talk about for a while now. I've done a lot of research on it before it was even research, and by that I mean I watched a documentary. Most, if not all, of the trial is actually here on YouTube, and I've watched most of it. And this case just really intrigued me from the beginning, and I'm very curious to see what your thoughts on this case are going to be. So, obviously, as you can see, we are going to be talking about the case of the Menendez brothers. Now, I do this before I start every true crime case, but it's especially important, I think, in this video for me to say that this video and these videos in general are not intended for anyone under the age of 13, 14. This case, it includes a lot of disturbing information, most of which involve young children. So I want to put that out there. If that is going to be triggering for anyone, or if that is going to make you too uncomfortable, then this is not the video for you. This is not the case for you, and I apologize for that. But I have plenty of other true crime videos that you can watch if you'd like. So, I have my notes down here, as usual. If you've never seen a true crime video from me, I do refer to my notes as I go. I don't want to get any information wrong, and I'm also going to be talking about dates and a lot of details that I can't memorize, so I apologize if that's distracting, but I don't think it will be. I think we'll be okay. So, we're going to be talking about the Menendez brothers. Their names were Eric and Lyle Menendez. Lyle was the firstborn. His name was actually Joseph Lyle Menendez, but he went by his middle name. He was born on January 10th, 1968, and his younger brother Eric was born on November 27th, 1970. So they were only 2 years apart, so they were fairly close in age. In 1996, they were convicted of killing their parents. And the story of what led up to the murder of their parents is what makes this case so well known. If you talk to anyone, especially someone older than me, so maybe 30s, 40s, if you ask them, have you heard of this case, odds are they will remember when it was actually happening and when it was on the news. I know my parents do. So this is where I'm very curious to hear your opinions as we go along. Whether you believe their story or whether you think that the story that they came up to defend themselves with is just not true. Okay, so we're going to start from the very beginning, as I usually do, and I'm going to introduce you to their parents. Their father's name was Jose Enrique Menendez. Their mother's name was Mary Louise Kitty Menendez. She went by, her maiden name was Anderson, but Menendez, they got married, and she went by Kitty. So that's what we'll call her. So a little background on Jose. Jose immigrated to the United States from Cuba when he was 16 years old. After the Cuban Revolution, he attended Southern Illinois University, which is where he met Kitty. They married in 1963, and they moved to New York City for Jose's job. And he continued his education there first. He got an accounting degree, and then he began his career there. It was in New York City that their first son, Lyle, was born. And Kitty quit her job to be a stay-at-home mom and take care of Lyle. The family soon then moved to New Jersey, and that is where Eric was born 2 years later. As the boys grew up, they went to school school, of course. They went to the Princeton Day School in Mercer County, New Jersey. And as they got a little older, they played sports, they had a good life. In 1986, Jose's career moved him to Beverly Hills, California. So he was already doing very good in his career at the time. They were, a lot of people say they were living the American dream. They lived in Beverly Hills. They had this big mansion, which we'll get into a little bit later. They had nice cars. They were nicely dressed. And that American dream story is because Jose, he immigrated. He came from really nothing. And he worked for it and created a very nice life, at least on the outside, for his family. So from the outside, they looked like the perfect family. They looked like they wanted for nothing, and everyone thought that they were happy, right? So, this kind of developed a very prideful attitude in Jose. He was very proud, not necessarily all too humble, but he had a very proud personality where he always wanted to look perfect on the outside. He always wanted to be the best, and that later affected his family, as we will hear. So the following year, they were only in California for a year. Eric had started attending Beverly Hills High, where he earned average grades, but he wasn't, a brainiac. He started playing tennis, and he found that he was actually very, very good at it. He entered in tournaments and competitions, and he actually ranked number 44 in the nation. So he was very good. However, as he got older, he did kind of fall in with the wrong crowd, and he got in trouble for a string of burglaries with this crowd of bad friends. And Jose, with his money and his power, and he was very well known in the area, he kind of was able to sweep it under the rug. Moving on to Lyle. So Lyle was a little bit older, and he enrolled at Princeton University. His freshman year, he was actually put on academic probation for his poor grades. He was not a brainiac either. And he didn't always attend his classes, so he was put on probation. Eventually, he was suspended for a whole year for plagiarism, so he wasn't doing too hot. But like I said, from the outside, everyone thought they were perfect, right? You think, oh, they have money, they have everything, they're happy, their life is perfect. Well, if you ask the boys, things were not so perfect. If you take them playing sports, for instance, their dad was very competitive, very hard on them. They always had to be the best at whatever sport they played, and even some of their coaches were interviewed and they called him overbearing. If you picture that parent on the sidelines that's screaming at the coach, that's kind of what we're dealing with here. So sometimes things would seep through that maybe he wasn't the most perfect dad that everyone thought he was. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward to the night of the crime. So on the night of August 10th, 1989, at this point, Lyle was about 20-21. Eric was about 18 to 19 years old. Jose and his wife Kitty were sitting on the couch in their den. The TV was on. It was just an average night of them being at home, relaxing, when all of a sudden, Eric and Lyle walk into the den carrying shotguns. Jose was shot in the back of the head, dying instantly. Kitty was awakened by the shots, so she had kind of dozed off. She heard the shots. They woke her up. She jumped up and tried to run. She slipped in blood, and she was also shot in the leg, both of those things causing her to fall to the ground. She was then shot in the arm, the chest, and the face, leaving her completely unrecognizable. Both of them were also shot in their kneecaps to make it look like this was some sort of organized crime, like a mob sort of thing. So they were both shot in their kneecaps as well. In total, 15 rounds were shot from two 12-gauge shotguns. As you can imagine, the den looked horrible. There was blood everywhere, the walls, the ceiling. There was brain matter, all that fluid and that gushy stuff on the ceiling, on the walls, blood everywhere. It was horrific. So later that night, Lyle is the one that calls 911. And right away, the boys decide that they are not going to confess. They're going to try to cover it up. So Lyle calls 911 and says, "Someone shot my parents." Now, I have heard this 911 call. Again, if you watch the documentaries, if you do your research on YouTube, you will hear a lot of this stuff for yourself as well. I will try to leave as many links down below as I can. If you are interested, just proceed with caution. But I've heard the 911 call. He is crying hysterically, "Someone shot my parents, someone shot my parents." And the dispatcher is like, it's actually really hard to listen to. The dispatcher is like, what happened? And he keeps saying it over and over again. And they're like, "Who was shot?" And he's crying. He goes, "My mom and dad." So when the police arrived that night, this was the boys' story. They claimed that they had gone to the movies that night to see Batman, and then they went to the annual Taste of LA festival when the murders were taking place. I believe that festival is in Santa Monica, but I could be wrong. That doesn't really matter. Anyway, that's what they said. That's where they said they were. And then they came home and they found their parents dead. Now, police, this is where they kind of sort of messed up. They didn't see them as suspects at all. They didn't even think to question them. All they saw were two young-ish boys who had just seen their parents murdered, and they were grieving, and they didn't even think to, think of them as suspects. So they weren't tested for gunpowder residue, which if their hands were tested for residue, it would have been very clear that they had both shot firearms that night. But police did not test it, didn't even think about it. So they were just seen as two boys that were grieving. And there was just no evidence right away to tie them to the crimes. Now, police, of course, went on a search. A whole investigation took place. Not too much to go on right away. They, investigated and followed leads that would maybe tie it to, like, the mob, like I said before. Nothing came of it. They couldn't find anything. So now, one of the really strange things was, in the months following the murders, Lyle and Eric did not act like two young people that lost their parents. They were not grieving. I'll tell you what they did. They went around and they started spending their money lavishly. They got, they were left money because their parents were gone, and their father was worth, at the time, $14 million. They had a lot of money. And so their story was, they didn't know what to do with it. So Lyle bought a Rolex watch, a Porsche, and he also bought a cafe, like a restaurant, that he invested in. Eric, on the other hand, hired a full-time tennis tennis coach, which I believe was 40 or 50 grand, I read. He also flew to Israel to compete in a bunch of tennis competitions. They eventually left the family mansion. They didn't sell it, but they just left it completely unattended, and they lived in adjoining condos in nearby Marina Del Rey. So, I believe, yeah, I wrote it down here, between the time that their parents were murdered and the time that they were arrested, they spent around $700,000. Which back then, if that were now, it would be worth even more than that. Because, things were a little cheaper back then, I guess. So yeah, they were going around, they were spending their money, they were driving their mother's convertible around. They dined at expensive restaurants, they took trips to the Caribbean, they went to London. And so, people kind of saw this, and authorities, of course, were still investigating, so they were keeping a close eye on the family and everything. And they saw this, and they were like, wait, that's not right. That's a red flag. They're not acting like two young boys that just walked in on their parents brutally murdered. So right away, little red flags started popping up here and there. So the boys' spending led the police to believe that they may have had a financial motive. Maybe they got into a fight with their dad and whatever. Or maybe they didn't even really like him very much, but they knew how much he was worth, and so they killed their parents so they could get all that money. Right? That's what you would think, right, if you saw their spending habits. So now police started investigating them as suspects. So they went after Eric first, maybe because he was the younger one, but I don't really know. They went through his best friend at the time, whose name was Craig Signale, I believe. And he was going out to lunch with Eric one day, and so the police placed a wire on him. And they had him straight up ask Eric, "Did you kill your parents?" And Eric stuck to his story and said no. However, eventually it got to Eric. The weight of this lie and what they had done got to Eric, and he actually ended up confessing to his psychologist, whose name was 𝓢𝓸𝓬𝓲𝓪. And once he did that, there was no turning back. He confessed that they had killed their parents, and that right there was what led to their arrest. Lyle was arrested on March 8th, 1990, and Eric was actually in Israel for that tournament that I mentioned before. At the time when Lyle was arrested, Eric then came back, and then 3 days later turned himself in to the police. Both were held without bail and separated from each other. In August 1990, a few years later, the judge who dealt with this case, his name was James Albridge, I believe. And so he stated at first that the tapes between the conversation Eric had with him and his psychologist, the judge said that they were acceptable to use because normally you would deal with patient-doctor confidentiality. But what actually ended up happening is that when Lyle found out that Eric told his psychologist, he threatened the psychologist. I don't exactly know what he said, but basically threatening him to not turn them in. Because he did that, he completely just ruined that confidentiality thing, and they were able to use the tapes because the conversation was recorded. I think I forgot to mention that, but it was. So, long story short, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but long story short, the trial, the ruling, and everything was delayed for 2 years. Eventually, in December 1992, the brothers were finally actually charged with the murders of their parents. this point on, this is the part that like intrigued me the most, and it's really important that you listen until the end because I want to know what your thoughts are. So we're gonna go into the trial now, and again, I will link. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find like the first part of the trial, but I will link at least one video of the trial, and then from there you can go to the channel and watch all the videos of the trial that are posted. The YouTube channel is literally called Menendez Supporters, which we'll get into that later. It's very wild to me, but that's what it's called. And most of the trial is there, and you can find it there if you're interested. Because I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's very graphic. But anyway, let's get started with the trial. So, this trial was broadcasted everywhere. The biggest place was, it was broadcasted on Court TV, which I don't know if any of you know that. It's like a news station that, I mean, it's what it sounds like. It focuses on true crime cases, and it's very interesting. If you're into true crime, look into Court TV. So it was broadcasted in 1993, and it had everything that is entertaining to us humans, right? It was like a soap opera, you know, a rich, good-looking family torn apart because of scandal, and a lot of people fell in love with these boys because, I mean, I've put pictures in the video, you can see the thumbnail. They were very, very, very handsome. Eric even like touched on modeling a little bit. He did a little modeling here and there. It's a shame. It's like a waste because they were really, really handsome boys. So of course, girls like fell in love with that and wanted to watch because of that, which is kind of sick, but anyway. And then, you know, it's filled with drama and crime, and so people were just instantly hooked. Now, everyone originally thought it was going to be an easy trial. They just wanted to kill their parents for money. There's the proof. They confessed that they killed their parents. You see their spending habits. That's it. The jury is going to make a quick and easy decision. That's going to be it. The opposite happened. The very opposite happened. One day, Eric got on the stand during the trial, and they started asking questions, and they were trying to get to the bottom of why did you do it? Why did you do it? And he confessed while crying, or trying not to cry, I guess. He confessed that Jose had been molesting him from the time that he was a very, very young boy. And, you know, I watched a lot of interviews, and experts and journalists and everyone, the people that were there in the courtroom, they said that you could hear a pin drop. Like, everyone was stunned. No one saw that coming. There was no talk about it prior. And so everyone was like, oh, okay. And right there, that's when the trial took a big turn. So now, the boy's lawyer, her name was 𝓢𝓸𝓬𝓲𝓪. She became very well known because of this case, and so she took this and ran with it, basically. And so their defense argument was that the boys were acting in self-defense after growing up in a violent and disturbing and abusive household. And the boys' story was that they had those guns because they truly believed that their parents were going to kill them that night. Again, you watch the whole trial, it's all there, they explain it. It's hours and hours long. It's days long, really. Weeks long, but it's there. But that was their argument, that they feared for their life. You know, let me get into details and then we'll kind of circle back to that. So, of course, they were asked, well, what actually happened? What was the abuse? What was the extent of the abuse? So, it turned out that it had been happening to both boys because Lyle also confessed the same thing. And the boys didn't know that it was happening to the other one when they were younger. Again, this is just, I'm telling you what their story is. I'm not saying it's true or not. I'll get into my opinions later, but I'm just telling you their story. So that was their story. always happened behind closed doors. It was always the father and one of the boys in their bedroom. Door was always closed. Kitty never came in. The other boy never came in. Like, no one knew. It was very, very secret. It started when they were very, very, very young boys. And, you know, they didn't know any better. And so it started with Jose going in. And we'll take Eric, for instance. Eric was an athlete. So it started with Jose giving him massages, massaging his legs, massaging his back, his shoulders. And as time went on, he started to touch them differently, in more of a sexual way. And then as more time went on, it turned into him guiding them to perform sexual acts on him. Now, they were asked, you know, about, you know, how they felt about it and whatever. And when they were younger, you know, they always said they never liked it, but they didn't know any better. They didn't know, you know, does this happen to every kid? They didn't know. They were so young. You know, and as they got older and then they became teenagers, that's when they finally started to say, like, Dad, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And, you know, their dad didn't really take to that very kindly, but Eric did say, you know, he was never, at least in the beginning, he was never mean. He wasn't abusive, you know, like, he always was saying, you know, like, I'll take care of you, I'm gonna take care of you, you know, like that kind of attitude. That's how it started. Lyle also confessed, and this was like a major turning point for me when I was watching it. There was one point where Lyle, the older brother, confessed that he started to actually do these things to Eric as well as they started to get older, because it was all that they knew. So he would say he would take Eric, you know, outside whenever he wanted it, and he would kind of do what his father did to his little brother, and, you know, using objects, and you get the point. And at this point, this is all on video. The whole trial is on video, and when he says that, the camera zooms in on Eric, who's sitting like with their lawyer, and he is like sobbing, he's crying, he's got like a big vein popping out on the side of his head, because all the while people are still thinking, well, this could very well just not be true. They could have just came up with a really elaborate story, and this is the reasoning that they came up with, and they think that they'll get the sympathy vote, and, you know, they won't have to serve time. But I will say, just from watching it and like seeing their raw emotions, either they are the best actors in the world, or this did really happen to them. I am not saying that that is a reason to murder your parents. There are some people that are like, on the internet, that are like, they don't deserve this, they deserve better, they should have never gone to jail. They committed murder. Horrific, graphic murder. So I would not go that far. But I will say, my opinion, I do actually believe that there was some sort of abuse happening. But let's keep going. The lawyers touched on homosexuality and, you know, if the way that their father was with them, like, affected that. Did they think that they were gay or not? They said no. They mostly, I think that from what I saw, they mostly asked Eric that question. But the boys, like, had girlfriends. You know, Eric said for a second there, he maybe questioned his sexuality just because he didn't know any better. Like, this was the only physical contact he ever knew, and he was unsure how to feel about it at a young age, so he maybe questioned it a little bit. But both boys said that they were not homosexual, that they liked girls. They also talked about the the day that they both confessed to each other. I don't exactly know what age they were when they confessed, but they like said like, hey, Dad's been doing this to me. Hey, Dad's been doing this to me too. That kind of thing. Now, let's talk about the mom, because it was asked, did your mom, like, did you think she had any idea? Did she ever come into the room when your dad was in there by herself, you know, by himself with you? Like, what did she think was happening? And they said she never came in, she never asked questions, she never talked about it. And they did believe that she knew what was happening. During the trial, she was described as a selfish, mentally unstable alcoholic and drug addict who, you know, never put a stop to Jose's abusive behavior. They said that she was sometimes violent with them. And I think the thing with her is that she really just became her husband's like plaything, kinda. Like she didn't work, so she was just kind of relying on Jose and the life that he provided for her. He was having multiple affairs with other women that she most likely knew about, and so I think she was kind of afraid of him too. That's just my opinion, but I do genuinely think that she was kind of afraid of him as well. One of the boys' cousins came forward and remembered Eric coming to her when they were very young and saying, like, does this happen to you too? So the cousin also believed that that the boys were telling the truth, because she remembered Eric saying, well, what I just said, I'm repeating myself, you know, he said, does this happen to every kid? And he was genuinely confused, so she believes that they are telling the truth as well. So this trial went on for a very long time. It went on for 4.5 months. And there were 2 juries, one for each brother. And they were having a very hard time deciding whether these boys were guilty of straight up murder or if they were acting in self-defense. It was very hard. And now they got a lot of, like, the defense, the boys and their lawyer got a lot of, they were criticized a lot. You know, while this trial was going on, they were men at this point. They were in their early, mid-20s. They were like my age. They were not boys, but they were always referred to as the boys. They were always in their nice little polo sweaters, button-up shirts, always looking like prim and proper. And so people were, you know, some experts say like they were really being made to look like these perfect young boys that could do no wrong and were so helpless and vulnerable. And like, even me, the whole video, have I not been saying the boys? So I guess that's on me too. But yeah, anyway, so long story short, a second trial needed to be put in place because they just couldn't come to a decision. Cameras were not allowed in the courtroom at all, so it was very hush-hush. The judge didn't want that outside attention, and people, they were like literally gaining fans and like a fandom, and the judge didn't want that, so he said no cameras. That took place in 1995, and I honestly think that that was a very wise choice from the judge, the no camera thing. So after the second trial, it was official. Both of them were convicted of first-degree murder. In 1996, they were sentenced to life without parole, and they were also sent to separate prisons. They were considered to be maximum security prisoners or inmates, and they were segregated for the most part, at least in the beginning, from other prisoners. They remained in different prisons until February of 2018, but they were still in different housing units, so they still didn't see each other. On April 4th, 2018, of just a few months later, Lyle moved to the same housing unit as Eric, and they reunited for the first time in 22 years. They broke down, crying hysterically, and hugged each other, and all that stuff. A lot of people were not happy with that because they were like, they should be suffering as much as possible. Why would you let them be together again and like give them that moment of happiness? So a lot of people did not really like that. But and I believe even now, because that was only 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now almost, so I believe that they are still in the same housing unit. I haven't read anything otherwise. So they're housed in a unit that is reserved for inmates who agreed to participate in education and rehab programs. And like it's well, it says, I don't know, it sounds weird, but it says they're housed in a unit that is reserved for inmates who agree to participate in education and rehabilitation programs without creating disruptions. So, they have made several appeals over the years, all of which have been denied. They are never getting out, but they were lucky enough to not get the death sentence, right? That was pointed out to them in an interview I watched, which we'll get into that a little bit. Now, another really interesting thing about this is that even though they are spending their lives in prison, they are both married. They were not married going into prison, but they are both now married. When I tell you that they really got a fan base, they got letters, like to the point there were so many letters that they couldn't respond to them all, from all these women, you know, saying I support you and I think you're so handsome, and just like literally fan mail, which is so gross to me. I don't know. There's this whole like, okay, the main reason, I'll get back to the story in a second, the main reason that I first heard about the case of the Menendez brothers is because I was on TikTok and someone posted a TikTok of like, wow, I think I'm in love with this murderer, and it was a video of Eric Menendez, and I was like, what? So I looked up the case, and then that's when I like got hooked on the case because I thought it was interesting. But there are people that are like idolizing murderers. Like it was the same thing with Ted Bundy. Like why? Just why? But whatever. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, they got many letters offering love and support, and Lyle was the first one actually, and he started talking to one of the women who sent him a letter. And so in 1996, Lyle married Anna Erickson, but they divorced in 2001 because she discovered that Lyle was apparently cheating with another woman. Again, how? Unless, I didn't look into her too much, but unless they knew each other prior to him being arrested and he cheated on her prior to going to prison, I don't know, but I know they got married while he was in prison. Then, only 2 years later, in 2003, Lyle remarried, and he married a woman named Rebecca Sneed. They knew each other for 10 years prior to getting married. So, I guess they knew each other for a while. But still, that means that they still met after the murders took place. So, I don't know. Very confusing. I don't know. Then, in 1999, Eric married a woman named Tammy Sockman. And they're still married to this day, I believe. They got married in the prison waiting room. Their wedding cake was a Twinkie. In interviews, you know, she said that, you know, they improvised, but it was all that they needed, and, you know, she loves him so much, and all this stuff. She described their marriage as something I've dreamed about for a long time, and it's just something very special that I never thought I would have. There's a lid for every pot, am I right? I don't know. And, you know, they talk about, like, obviously they can't have sex with their wives, and so they talked about that a little bit in interviews, and, like, You know, they say it sucks, but that's basically just what it is, basically. And there's nothing that they can do about it. Tammy, Eric's wife, went on to write a book. She became kind of famous for marrying this dude. It was released in 2005, and it was titled, "They Said We'd Never Make It, My Life with Eric Menendez." And she also went on Larry King and did interviews and said that Eric actually did a lot of editing for the book. So he was kind of part of it as well. So, yeah, this case is a lot. It's very dynamic. There's a lot of moving parts, and it also went on to inspire many things. I have a list here, actually. It went on to inspire countless SNL episodes. Law & Order Season 1 episode titled "The Serpent's Tooth" was inspired by them. The documentary I watched, which I watched it on Hulu, and it's the ABC documentary titled "Truth and Lies, The Menendez Brothers, American Sons, American Murders." That is from 2017. There's a Lifetime movie titled "Menendez, Blood Brothers," also from 2017, that I have not watched, but I kind of want to look it up. And then an episode of Barbara Walters. It's a 2-part interview. I watched it as well. And it's like a series that she does called Barbara Walters Presents American Scandals, and it's titled "Menendez Brothers, The Bad Sons." She was very harsh on them, I will say. But, like, you know what? Hey, I don't believe that they need to be, like, coddled or babied, you know? They're also grown men now. They're, like, in their 50s, so... you know, at one point, I think it was Eric that was like, you know, we were just normal boys. We were just normal guys. And she was like, "Eric, you were a normal boy. You killed your parents." And he was like, "I know." I will say, while I will never, ever glorify and, like, sexualize a murderer, ever, I think that's sick, in case I haven't said it enough in this video, I will say I understand people's fascination with them. They're very, very charismatic. The way that they speak and the way that they carry themselves is, like, intriguing. Eric has, like, I don't know if this is just, like, the ASMR artist in me, he has a very soothing voice, like, just the way that he speaks and, like, the speed in which he speaks. So I get it, like, knowing how the world is and knowing how certain people in the world are, I get it. But I still think it's sick. Like, there are so many, like, support pages, and when I was watching the trial, you know, one of the best parts of YouTube is reading other people's comments, right? So I rolled down and I read most of the comments, and there were so many that were like, they deserve so much better, they shouldn't have gotten any time. I mean, if what they said was true, which at this point only God knows the truth and them, but if what they said was true, I can't even begin to imagine what they went through. I am blessed enough where I have never had to deal with that, so I can't speak from that point of view of dealing with abuse and stuff. But I do believe stuff like that does something to a person. I'll just say that, and I'll just leave it there. But if it's not true, and, you know, they really did just do it for the money, again, don't know how likely that is, but let's just say then they deserve everything they got. I just think it's such an unfortunate story, because they had money, they had power, they had good looks, like, they could have done amazing things with their lives, but they didn't get to, because stuff like what could have possibly happened to them, that messes you up. And it's a perfect example of no one knows what goes on behind closed doors. You don't know. So, I don't know. I think it's just a good reminder of that. But their story genuinely makes me really sad. Just all around. Like, for all of them. It just makes me so sad. So, anyway, that is the case of the Menendez brothers. I'm very curious to know your thoughts. If you made it to the end of this video, you're a real one. I appreciate you. And yeah, just let me know your